They say family will always protect you, but sometimes the wolf wears the face of someone you've loved since birth. I'm Margaret Whitmore, born in 1946 in Melbourne, and I've lived in the same weatherboard house in Hawthorne for 43 years. Back in 2024, at 78, my own niece tried to steal everything I'd worked for while I slept. I felt confused and violated. But then something happened that changed everything. Today, at 79 and sitting in what's now a safe house for women like me, I'm finally sharing this because no one should suffer in silence like I almost did. If you're listening, drop your location below and hit subscribe. This story might save someone you love. It started with ink. I woke up on a Tuesday morning in March, sunlight streaming through my lace curtains, and there it was, a dark blue stain on my right thumb. Not just any stain, but the kind you get from those cheap ballpoint pens at the post office. I stared at it, my mind racing. I hadn't signed anything the day before. I hadn't even left the house. Strange, I muttered, scrubbing at it with soap and water. The ink was stubborn, like it had been pressed deep into my skin while I was unconscious. A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed the feeling away. At my age, you learn to dismiss the little mysteries that creep into daily life, but then I noticed other things. My reading glasses weren't where I'd left them on the kitchen table. The stack of mail seemed thinner than yesterday. My favorite teacup, the one with the faded roses that belonged to my mother, was sitting in the dish rack, clean and dry, though I distinctly remembered leaving it dirty in the sink. Margaret, you're losing your marbles, I told myself, but the words felt hollow. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Official-looking envelope, return address from Baxter and Associates Notary Services. I'd never heard of them. Inside was a copy of a property transfer document, stamped and signed, transferring my house, my beautiful, mortgage-free home to 1 Sienna Blackwood. My niece, my hands shook as I read the signature at the bottom. It looked like mine, but something was off. The M in Margaret was too loopy, the W in Whitmore too sharp. And there, beside the signature, was a clear thumbprint in blue ink, the same blue ink that had stained my thumb. I sank into my armchair, the letter fluttering to the floor. Sienna had been visiting more frequently lately, always with some excuse. Just checking on you, Aunt Maggie, she'd say, bringing flowers or homemade biscuits. She'd insisted on having a key for emergencies and had power of attorney for my medical decisions after my mild stroke 2 years ago. But this was theft. This was betrayal of the cruelest kind. My neighbor Fiona knocked on my door that afternoon, her weathered face creased with concern. You look pale as a ghost, love. Is everything all right? I showed her the letter. Fiona had been a legal secretary for 30 years before retiring, and her eyes narrowed as she examined the document. This is dodgy as hell, Margaret. Look here, the notary signature is dated last Tuesday, but I saw Sienna leaving your house that morning around 6 a.m. What notary works at dawn? We called Baxter and Associates. The receptionist was helpful but confused. Mr. Baxter was in Sydney all last week for his daughter's wedding. He couldn't have notarized anything locally. The pieces fell into place like dominoes. Sienna had used my own fingerprint while I slept, probably pressing my thumb onto an ink pad and then onto the forged document. She'd forged the notary's signature, knowing most people wouldn't verify it immediately. But she'd made one mistake. The witness signature belonged to Thomas Mitchell, my next-door neighbor. When Fiona and I confronted him, his face went red with embarrassment. Sienna told me you'd asked her to handle some paperwork, he stammered. She said you were getting forgetful and wanted to make things easier. She seemed so concerned about you, Margaret. I thought I was helping. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, with a cup of tea, staring at the forged document. 43 years of memories lived in these walls. I'd raised my children here after my husband died young. I'd hosted Christmas dinners, birthday parties, and countless cups of tea with friends who'd since passed on. This house wasn't just property. It was my life, my independence, my legacy. Sienna had tried to steal all of that while I slept, trusting and vulnerable. But she'd underestimated one thing. I might be 78, but I wasn't helpless. I picked up the phone and dialed the police. Sergeant Davies speaking. This is Margaret Whitmore on Elm Street. I need to report a fraud. My niece has forged documents to steal my house, and I have proof. The next morning, I marched into the Commonwealth Bank where Sienna held power of attorney for my accounts. The manager, a kind woman named Patricia, listened with growing alarm as I explained the situation. Mrs. Whitmore, we can revoke that power of attorney immediately. I'm also placing a fraud alert on all your accounts. As Patricia typed on her computer, she frowned. This is concerning. There have been several large transfers from your savings to an account in Sienna's name over the past 6 months. Small amounts, but they add up to nearly $15,000. My blood ran cold. The theft had been going on far longer than I'd realized. That afternoon, Sienna appeared at my door, her face a mask of false concern. She was 35, blonde, and had always been the family favorite, charming, successful, and seemingly devoted to her aging relatives. Aunt Maggie, I heard you've been making some calls. Are you feeling confused again? Maybe we should talk to Dr. Henderson about adjusting your medications. The gaslighting was smooth practiced, but I was ready for it. The only thing I'm confused about, Sienna, is how someone I loved like a daughter could try to steal my home while I slept. Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. Then the concerned niece was back. I don't know what you think happened, but you're clearly not thinking straight. Maybe it's time we looked into assisted living options. I closed the door in her face and called my lawyer. Daniel Shore had been practicing elder law for 20 years, and his face darkened as he reviewed my case. Margaret, this is one of the most calculated attempts at financial exploitation I've seen. We're filing an emergency injunction to freeze any property transfer immediately. Within hours, the legal machinery was in motion. The injunction was granted, and Sienna's attempt to sell my house to a property developer was halted just days before settlement. But the real shock came when Daniel's investigation uncovered the full scope of her betrayal. She's been accessing your medical records for 2 years, he explained, spreading documents across his desk. Every doctor's visit, every prescription, every note about your stroke recovery. She was building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent. The medical records showed a pattern of manipulation I'd never noticed. Sienna had been present at most of my appointments, subtly suggesting to doctors that I was becoming forgetful, that I needed more help with daily tasks. She'd even convinced Dr. Henderson to prescribe mild sedatives to help with anxiety, which explained why I'd been sleeping so deeply lately. Sergeant Davies called that evening with more disturbing news. We found a threatening note in your mailbox, Margaret. Drop this nonsense or you'll regret it. No signature, but the handwriting matches samples from Sienna's employment records. The note had been tucked under my morning newspaper, written on expensive stationery that smelled faintly of Sienna's perfume. The threat was clear: back down or face consequences. But I'd lived through the Great Recession, raised 3 children as a widow, and survived cancer twice. A spoiled niece with delusions of inheritance wasn't going to break me now. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Sienna arrived with her own lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately requested a competency evaluation for me. Your Honor, he argued, my client is deeply concerned about her aunt's mental state. These accusations stem from confusion and paranoia common in elderly patients with cognitive decline. Judge Harrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, wasn't impressed. If Mrs. Whitmore is incompetent, how did she manage to uncover such a sophisticated fraud scheme and present such detailed evidence? The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Emma Chan, spent 3 hours evaluating me. She tested my memory, reasoning skills, and understanding of financial matters. When the results came back, they were unequivocal. I was sharp, competent, and fully capable of managing my affairs. Mrs. Whitmore shows no signs of cognitive impairment, Dr. Chen testified. Her recall of events is precise. Her reasoning is sound, and her emotional responses are entirely appropriate to the situation. Sienna's face went white as her primary defense crumbled. The evidence mounted quickly. Bank records showed the systematic theft of my savings. Phone records revealed Sienna had called the fake notary service from her mobile Most damning of all, security footage from the pharmacy where she'd purchased the ink pad was time-stamped. Just hours before my mysterious thumb stain appeared, Thomas Mitchell, racked with guilt over his unwitting participation, provided a detailed statement about how Sienna had manipulated him. She was so convincing, he told the court. She said Margaret was embarrassed about needing help and had asked her to handle things quietly. But the breakthrough came when Fiona discovered something extraordinary. While helping me organize my papers, she found a hidden folder in Sienna's old bedroom, the room she'd used during childhood visits. Inside were photocopies of my financial statements going back 5 years, practice sheets where she'd forged my signature dozens of times, and most chilling of all, a detailed timeline labeled Operation Independence. The timeline revealed a 3-year plan to gradually gain control of my assets. Phase 1. Establish medical power of attorney after my stroke. Phase 2. Document cognitive decline through manipulated medical visits. Phase 3. Transfer property and liquidate assets. Phase 4. Place me in a care facility and assume full control of my estate. I'd been nothing more than a mark to her, a problem to be solved and assets to be harvested. When confronted with this evidence, Sienna's lawyer tried one last desperate gambit. He approached Daniel with a plea deal. Sienna would relinquish all claims to my property and repay the stolen money if I agreed to drop the criminal charges. She's young, he argued. She made a mistake. Surely family forgiveness is more important than revenge. I looked at Daniel and spoke clearly. No deal. What she did wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated crime against a vulnerable person. If I let her walk away, she'll just find another elderly relative to victimize. The trial lasted 3 days. Sienna took the stand in her own defense, tears streaming down her face as she claimed she'd only been trying to protect me from myself. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury saw through her performance. She was convicted on all charges: forgery, attempted fraud, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and identity theft. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, though she ultimately served only 8 months after accepting a plea deal. But my victory went beyond justice. With Daniel's help, I established a Margaret Whitmore trust, converting my house into a transitional residence for older women escaping financial abuse. The first resident was Eleanor, a 72-year-old whose son had been stealing her pension. Then came Ruth, whose daughter-in-law had forged her name on credit applications. Today, 6 women call my old house home while they rebuild their lives and reclaim their independence. We've created a support network that extends far beyond these walls, helping dozens of seniors recognize and report elder abuse. I speak at community centers now, sharing my story and teaching others to recognize the warning signs. The ink stain that started it all became a symbol of resilience, proof that even in our most vulnerable moments, we can fight back. Sienna never contacted me after her release. I heard through my family that she moved interstate, but I won't dwell on her fate. My energy goes toward the women who need help now, the ones who wake up confused and violated, wondering if they're losing their minds. If you're watching this and something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Document everything. Reach out for help. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve to live with dignity and respect, no matter your age. Like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. Share this with anyone who might need to hear it. And the comment below tells me about the moment you decided to fight back. Your voice matters, and your story could save someone else. Moral lesson: wisdom isn't weakness, and age isn't surrender. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we never expected to fight. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek help boldly. Your wisdom and strength can illuminate paths for others facing similar darkness, creating hope.